I'm absolutely in love with this build. It has blasted its way through everything in this game. We're talking Deathless Uber bosses, not Cirrus, of course, never Cirrus, but Uber Exarch, Uber Cortex. I easily face tanked Uber Shaper Beams and Elders, Explodey Circles, like no problem. I got scared doing it, kind of chickened out at some of the time while doing the Uber Shaper Beam tanking challenge, but it's fine, like completely fine. I've done triple and even quadruple damage rolls on tier 17s. I still cleared them. Some of them deathless, like, again, no problem. Not always. Sometimes tier 17s will shock you and you just completely get blown to bits. But all told, I found this build to be stunning in both its defenses and its damage output. Hi, it's Lerald, and this is my build for Forbidden Rite Pathfinder. Don't forget to like and subscribe, blah, blah, blah. This is a build with a lot of favorites for me. It combines my favorite Ascendancy, Pathfinder, with my favorite spell in the game, Forbidden Rite, and my 3 favorite uniques, Tides of Time, Progenesis, and then of course, Mahuxotl's Machination. Sorry, Quillrain, you've been knocked down to 4th. So let's start with what makes this build so special. The best part of this build, at least to me, is that it mostly uses uniques, so it's just really easy to figure out how you're going to gear it up. On top of that, most of the uniques you need are pretty cheap. Like I did say, Progenesis is in there. Not exactly mandatory. It's more like really, really nice icing on the top of the cake. And that's easily the most expensive one. Everything else, Tides of Time, you can get a really good one, 2 Divines. Mahuxotl's Machination, 2 or 3 Divines. Pretty easy. You could scale this build up to a very high level of expense if you really want to go for fancy corruptions, and you should, because this build is great. It is worth investing into. Even with all the content I've done and destroyed, I would say there is still a massive amount of potential to push this build even further, to be faster, to be tankier, just to be stronger. I could really spend a lot more and ramp up the quality of life without losing probably any damage, certainly any damage that I would notice. This is also a build that can hit the dot cap, and it does. It hits the dot cap with a lot of room to spare, which is good because that allows you to move around and deal with mechanics and still be able to deal a reasonable amount of damage. So we are talking about the literal maximum possible DPS that you can deal with poison, which is 35.7 something million DPS, plus a little bit of on-hit damage, like 700,000 on-hit DPS or a million on-hit DPS or so. This is a Mahuxotl's Machination build, as I've said. Mahuxotl's has probably become my favorite unique in the game, and this build is a really amazing showcase of just how powerful it can be. So let's just run through all of the bonuses you get out of this completely insane shield. First of all, it comes from the Trial Master, which is now a pretty easy fight to actually get into and do. You can guarantee that he's in every single ultimatum, and you just go kill the Trial Master some number of times, a lot of times, 50 times or whatever, and you'll get one of these, or you can buy one from somebody for 2 or 3 Divines. That works. And this is just a shield that has 6 different Vol-themed Keystone passives on it, and we'll just run through those right now. Corrupted Soul. This really just gives you a massive amount of energy shield, which is not really that valuable, as we'll see here in a second, defensively, but it does make it so that you don't actually have to have energy shield on your gear in order to have energy shield, because of that 15% of max life being added as extra any energy shield. And this is actually very useful. We make take full advantage of almost all of the passives that are on this. Divine Flesh makes it so that all damage taken bypasses your energy shield, and that's why we're going over and converting it to Eldritch Battery, because it's not useful as a defensive layer, but you have this incredible bonus of converting 50% of all the elemental damage you take. So fire, cold, lightning, 50% of all of that gets converted to chaos damage. And then you get 5% max chaos res. This is insanely valuable because we're able to combine it with another really powerful defensive bonus, Lethal Pride, committed to Rakiata, conquered by Rakiata. So we take a keystone that's in that radius and we'll get tempered by war. This makes it so that we convert 50% of the cold and 50% of the lightning damage we take into fire damage. So we're converting 50% of all of the elemental damage into, okay. The police are showing up to arrest me for how tanky this build is. So 50% of the elemental damage is getting converted into chaos, and then 50% of the cold and lightning is getting converted into fire. This has the incredibly powerful benefit of, very good convenience, very good quality of life, as we can see here, of making it so you don't have to get cold and lightning res. Great. Good. Very nice. More importantly, when you convert damage types, enemies can't penetrate the converted damage. This is why I'm able to just laughably face tank shaper balls, like to the point that I thought I was blocking them all because my health bar just wasn't moving. When you deal with an enemy like Uber Shaper, the shaper balls normally penetrate 40% of your cold res. That's why they just immediately shred you even on a tanky character. If we convert 100% of the cold damage into other types like 50% chaos and 50% fire, then that cold penetration he has does absolutely nothing, and those balls will deal dozens or maybe hundreds of damage, the amount of damage that we can heal up in half a second and like just feel like nothing happened. We also convert about 20% or so of our physical damage into fire or chaos. Most of that comes from the helm implicit and just crafted helm prefix, and then some of that comes from lethal pride. If you really want to spend big on a nice lethal pride, you'll get one that has multiple of this, multiple fizz damage taken as fire. I only have one because I was being a little cheap, but I did get a couple of max life rolls in here, but then, fizz damage is extra fire. That's worthless. Strength, that's helpful for stats, I suppose, but a couple of max lives and one fizz into fire. So if I could get even more fizz into fire, that would really push this build to another level. We're also able to mitigate a lot of physical and chaos damage taken due to this unique here, Doppelganger's Guise, and this gives us anywhere from 30 to 40% less physical and chaos damage taken. This is amazing, and it can't be overwhelmed by enemies because it is just less damage taken, not damage reduction. So if you click on an Eldritch Altar that gives you minus fizz damage reduction, that doesn't matter. Our fizz damage reduction, our evasion, all of those base standard defenses, very low. Very, very low. All of the stuff that we're using defensively here is damage conversions or less damage takens for the most part. We also have 100% uptime on Adrenaline due to Annihilation's approach, and that is the buff that gives us 100% increased damage, 25% attack, cast, and move speed, and another 10% fizz DR. So we're able to cast incredibly fast and able to move relatively fast, despite the fact that we're not using a Quicksilver Flask. It's definitely a step down from the Toxic Rain Pathfinder in terms of move speed, but pretty much everything is. And I think compared to a normal build, that was probably the biggest adjustment I had to make, was not having that unfathomably fast move speed all the time. And I would say I've gotten pretty used to it. Now, this bonus and the Annihilation's approach in general does come at the cost of being ailment immune, so we are able to be shocked and ignited. Ignite, we just heal through, it's not a big deal. Shock, we're able to reduce that impact by using Soul of Garakan, and you can further reduce it by using some tattoos. That really helps basically nullify shock. And, you could just swap around to rare boots and give yourself ailment immunity that way. I think it's really just up to you how you want to balance your defenses, damage, and quality of life. And that's kind of the whole through line for this entire build. You can run a very simple basic setup that's just super unique heavy. It's like unique here, unique here, unique here, here, and potentially even in your weapon slot, maybe even your second ring. A lot of unique flasks. Like, it's very possible to run tons and tons and tons of uniques and make this build very, very simple. And then, if you want to expand from there, spend a little bit more currency on it, maybe kind of make it your own, that is also an option. Now, in terms of recovery, we're getting the standard 3,000 life per second or so from our life flask as a Pathfinder. We're also using Replica Sorrow of the Divine. That gives us Eldritch Battery. It gives us a pretty substantial damage increase from being a Sulfur Flask. And it also makes our life regen apply to our energy shield, which is why this is just constantly filling up over and over again. And to go back to the Mahuxotl's Machination, the reason that it hits full and then instantly drops is because of Everlasting Sacrifice, the next really important node here on this list, which makes it so that when you hit max energy shield, it zeroes out and then gives you this buff right here, 5% increased max res. And that applies to all of them, not just chaos. As you can see, we go from 88. If I take this flask off here and let that buff fall off, we go from 88 chaos res down to 83. And, you know, that's pretty huge with us converting so much of the damage that we take, physical damage, and then half of elemental damage into chaos res. Having 88% of it is just, it's really, really crazy. So then just to cover the other two Mahuxotl's Machination passives here, I skipped over Eternal Youth. It basically doesn't really do a lot for us in the setup that we're using here, and that's fine. But Immortal Ambition makes it so that our ES starts at 0, and then we get Slayer Overleech that then also fills up our energy shield. Now, we're not using any leech. You can. I have played around with a Leech Watcher's Eye. I bought a lot of Watcher's Eyes just to play around with them. I ultimately found that it was pretty good, and it was a budget option. I'm not sure where I put these here. They are. So I played around with this one just to see, like, would this do anything? And I didn't really love this. I found that having phasing in this build didn't really do, you know, it's annoying to go from being a build that's super fast and has phasing to a build that is less fast with left mouse button and doesn't have phasing. But ultimately, I've gotten pretty comfortable with not using this, so that's fine. And then this build right here, this Watcher's Eye right here, dot multi while affected by Malevolence, and damage leeches life while affected by Vite. It was decent, but it just isn't quite as much healing as you get per second from a Watcher's Eye. With this modifier here, life per enemy hit while affected by Vitality is just, it adds so much life, because Forbidden Rite, if we look at the tooltip, Forbidden Rite gives you a baseline of 6 projectiles with greater multiple projectiles, and then we're using Spell Echo, so it fires twice, so 12 projectiles per cast. But also, it can fire extra projectiles at up to 10 surrounding enemies, and that applies to each cast. So you can get up to 32 projectiles per cast, so that's potentially 32 hits per cast, and then you're casting 6 times or 8 times a second. So the point is lots and lots and lots and lots of healing per second, like over 3,500 healing per second just from that Watcher's Eye Vitality Life on hit mod, potentially, which is insane when you also are getting 3,000 plus life per second from your life flask. We also have 3 curses that auto cast from our gloves here, from our boots here, Tempt Chains, Enfeeble, and Despair, and we're making full use of all of those as well. And so just really, really enormous amounts of damage reduction. I'll just mention the last modifier here on the Mahuxotl's Machination Vol Pact. Since we're not doing any leech, at least in the current setup, that doesn't do anything. But if we were, then that's sort of halved by Eternal Youth anyway, so that you just have regular leech, kind of cancel each other out. All right, so now I kind of want to show off my MTX. I'll talk more about gear and go into the PoB in a second. MTX, people always ask questions. So the red circle around me is a reinforced ruby flask MTX. I'll take that off. You see it immediately despawns. And then I'm just running like flask MTX on all the different flasks, just to have fun with it, since it is a Pathfinder build. For the most part, the rest of the MTX I'm wearing is black and white armor set. I like the way it looks. I really love the wings. And then like white weapon, I'm using a white shield. This is just the whitest shield I had, very black and white type of aesthetic I'm going for with this character. I'm using the surfboard for some reason. I probably white footprints make more sense. Yeah, they definitely look better than the surfboard. And then from there, Celestial Turtle, Celestial Baby Elephant. Not really anything all too fancy, other than, I'm not using shield charge anymore, other than the Celestial Kitty Cat Forbidden Rite effect, which is one of the best MTX in the game. I need to actually put flasks back on to be able to cast that, though. As you can see, looks amazing. I love the way that this looks. This is really what kind of turned me on to Forbidden Rite in the first place, like quite a while ago. All right, so in terms of leveling the build, I started out using Caustic Arrow, then I switched over to Poisonous Concoction, like in Act 1. Once I hit level 20, I used a standard dex stacking one with nothing smite build to level, and I ran with that all the way to level 78 when I could equip all of the uniques that I needed to run this build. Then I swapped over to this build as it is. I think I basically was just playing it without cluster jewels, really, initially. and I leveled up to 98 in only a couple of hours. I just farmed Atoll, Jungle Valley, Dunes, all the usual maps with the Domination Shrine strategy I made a video about a few weeks ago. I have seen a lot of comments on that video recently saying that GGG nerfed it, and so I wanted to test it, and they haven't. It was never in any patch notes, and it still works exactly as I described it. I will probably push to level 100 at some point, but I was kind of getting bored of just farming tier 16s, and specifically like domination tier 16s. I really wanted to stress test the build and some high level content. I did, and it held up really, really well. So just kind of to run through some of my normal FAQ stuff here. The content it does is everything. I haven't played simulacrums yet on it, but I'm confident it would shred them. It shredded tier 17s and uber bosses. I'm sure that simulacrums would be very easy and very boring, so I don't want to bother because I'd just be bored. In terms of the expenses, I really do think you can get this build up and running pretty cheaply. I think most of the mandatory uniques, some of the things like doppelganger guys, you know, if you get an uncorrupted one and you six link it, I really don't think that'll be particularly expensive. Now, if you're wanting to push for like higher levels of damage, getting one that has a useful corruption. So Forbidden Rite really only has 2 tags here. It has spell and chaos, but there aren't corruptions for that. It has AoE and projectile, and so you do want to get a +2 to level of AoE or +2 to level of projectile gems. You could go for a +1 to level of all socketed gems. I think that could also push your damage up pretty significantly, but I would imagine that one would probably be more expensive, maybe less valuable as well, since you're not really getting as much value out of just getting more levels into Forbidden Rite. And then you could get good corruptions on a Mahuxotls. You could go for that sort of thing. Good corruptions on a Tides of Time would really do you nicely. Good corruption on an Annihilation's Approach, again, would do you really well. I think maybe the best one to go for a corruption on would be the Anathema, because this ring really doesn't have a great implicit. You know, it's just energy shield. You could definitely get a wide variety of useful corruptions on this ring. I think that would be a good idea to go for. And yeah, you know, I think there's definitely a lot you can do to make the build more expensive. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet that you can do to make it cheaper is just run the Dark Sphere. This wand took me about 30 or 40 divines worth of fossils to craft. I did use fossil crafting. I don't necessarily think that's the best or most deterministic method. I thought it would be the fastest, and I think in my case it was the fastest, but yeah, you know, it might take a little bit to craft a wand like this, whereas just running a Darkseer for a while, you can get pretty close to the dot cap running a Darkseer. And as you can see from the stats I have on this one here, max life and max mana, it gives you +2 to spell skill gems. It also gives you malediction, so enemies that you blind, you're basically going to be blinding everything because you're hitting so often and so fast that with that 10% chance to blind on hit, you're going to blind basically everything that you fight for any amount of time. So they're going to be doing 10% less damage and taking 10% more. So like I have pulled up a PoB here. Let me drag that over. And this is what my PoB numbers look like. This is Fizzmax hit with no endurance charges active, which I would say you probably have endurance charges active about half the time when you're fighting unique or rare enemies like big boys. So it probably looks somewhere in the range of this. There are a lot of conditionals in this build, stuff that you can toggle on and off. You can see that like we have, does the enemy have energy shield? We have that that mastery here, and we are so far over the dot cap that even with that turned on, like it doesn't do much. It gives us 0.1% more damage, so that's a good thing, right? It's good to have all those protections in place in terms of your damage output, so that if you are missing, maybe you don't have 15 stacks of Withered, or maybe you don't have 10 stacks of Gale Force, or maybe the enemy has some sort of damage reduction effect on, you're still getting up into that dot cap range. So I think the biggest advantage that the Darkseer provides is probably cheapness, but you could also, like, as you can see here, by switching to it, you also get a lot of life if you're running one that gives +2 max life per level. There are a lot of different variants. There's life and mana, life and energy shield mana. So you definitely want to get one that has life per level, and it can be +1 or +2. You want to make sure it's +2. In order to make my mana work in the current setup that I'm running, I wanted one that's both +2 life and +2 mana. And by using that, I was able to just barely squeak in the mana reservation without having to make any like gear changes. And I did play around with this in some tier 17 maps and against some Uber bosses, and I found it to be pretty comparable to the 30-40 divine wand that I had crafted. It's definitely slower. It doesn't have that wonderful cast speed implicit that you get out of the profane wand, but the damage was really close and it was pretty significantly tankier. And this scepter, this Darkseer that I'm looking at right here, the one that I have in game, cost, instead of like 40 divines, it cost 2. So it's definitely a really good cheap option that you can use for a long time in this build. I mean, you can kill Ubers with it. I have done that. So definitely a good option. And I think that's probably the biggest advantage of this whole build. It's just that it can be done very cheaply, but it can also be scaled up to an insane degree. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the skills. Just going to break down the skills here. Forbidden Rite is your main skill. You use Forbidden Rite, you use Awakened Void Manipulation, Deadly Ailments, Unbound Ailments, and Greater Multiple Projectiles. Those don't have to be awakened, but it is better if they are. Awakened GMP is the most expensive of those by far. And again, not mandatory, definitely better if they are. I haven't even leveled Void Manipulation all the way up to 5, so that's another +1 level of skill gems that I can get out of the deal here. Pretty close to level 5, just haven't actually gotten it there yet. And yeah, that's just like another layer of damage, kind of coverage that I'll get out of finally finishing that off. Important note here, Spell Echo versus Awakened Spell Echo. Regular Spell Echo is like a, I don't know, 100 chaos at 2020 or less than that. I mean, you just self-level it, that's pretty easy. Awakened Spell Echo is like 80 plus divines. There's no difference between the two. Awakened Spell Echo adds almost no extra damage at all, because the main thing it adds is not an extra echo, it just adds more damage on the final spell, the second repeat, or the second cast, the one repeat of the echo. And that more damage doesn't really increase your damage all that much, especially when you consider that we're very near the dot cap. So don't waste 80 divines on Awakened Spell Echo. It is a waste, as you can see here. This is with the Darkseer setup. If we switch over to the wand, where we're very, very clearly over the dot cap. If I were to, like, let me click here, Spell Echo, Awakened Spell Echo. How much damage am I gaining? Oh my god, 70,000 DPS. Yeah, completely pointless. Totally not worth the expense there. Now we're running a lot of different skills here, a lot of different like automated setups. We have this Enduring Cry linked to Call to Arms, so we can just have that yelling all the time. And that will be giving us life regen from Enduring Cry, but also, more importantly, it'll be giving us endurance charges. So we will have endurance charges a lot whenever we're fighting rares. And that adds up to a lot of physical damage reduction. Like, you know, as I said before, in the config tab, there's a lot of moving parts in here, but you can see we're at like 46k max hit, which I think is nothing to sniff at, especially for a Pathfinder build, something that's not like an armor stacker. But then with endurance charges, we're looking at more like 95k max hit. And then if we switch over to a Darkseer, we're over 100,000, over 110,000 phys max hit, which is just crazy amounts of defenses for a caster build. Really tanky. We also have Immortal Call, and we've got that in an automation support, and that has about 50% uptime. I mean, this is a thing I love about this state of automation support in Immortal Call. I don't love the constant noise that it's making, but you know, I'll deal with that to be like just massively tanky all the time. Definitely a big part of why we're able to just kind of tank Shaper Beams like it's nothing. We are running a level 1 Vitality so that we can use Vitality Watcher's Eye, get all the benefit from that. We're using Haste and Divine Blessing support, and this is probably the most complicated, most like difficult part of the build. Is if you've ever played Gears of War, if you remember active reloads, you do have to kind of active reload time your Divine Blessing Haste. And I did play around for a little while with actually 3-linking this and putting like inspiration in or increased duration support. And I did find the quality of life of increased duration support to be pretty good. It bumped this up from about a 16-second Divine Blessing. So basically something I really only like to pop like when I'm fighting a rare into the more like 25-second range, where I could basically maintain it up 100% of the time. So usually I'll just zone into a map and I'll pop the Divine Blessing. I'll get all my flasks going, pop the Divine Blessing, and then I'll hit Approaching Flames, and then I'll start zipping through and blasting stuff down. And then maybe sometimes I'll refresh Haste while I'm in the middle of the map, and sometimes I may not bother. Moving over to the shield here, we have Herald of Agony, very necessary. It's a poison build. You got to have Hoag, and he gives you a lot more damage with poison. He gives you a lot more poison chance, and that poison chance is important because we do need to be at 100% chance to poison, so 20% of that. If we look at like turning him off just for some reason, just to show like how much damage we would lose, we lose a pretty good amount. We really lose out more on the chance to poison, which is not being reflected, I think, accurately here. Yeah, 80% chance to poison as opposed to 100%. So when I was initially getting this build going into like level 80, 78 range, I was using I think it's in one of these areas here. I think I was using a Circle of Anguish. I'm not sure. Maybe I've thrown it into a tab here. Yeah. And so that increased buff effect helped with getting poison chance up initially, but ultimately I found it a little difficult to cap my reses while using a Circle of Nostalgia. Circle of Nostalgia was the unique ring that I was using initially in that situation. So Frost Blink of Wintry Blast linked with faster casting support is our main mobility skill. I don't like Shield Charge. I hate Shield Charge. Anytime that I can get away with not using Shield Charge in a build, I do. And I know a lot of people use Shield Charge in this type of build, and I opted to go this direction. And as you can see, it's very satisfying to Frost Blink all around. Super duper 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 fast. I've been doing this just a lot, just for fun. Really, it's just fun to do. And also, it's pretty good for dodging out of things. That's pretty good convenience wise. And so now we just have a couple more links of gems to show off. We're using Petrified Blood. That is ultimately how we're able to get away with not running Determination or Grace or any real amount of armor or evasion or anything like that. Petrified Blood in conjunction with Progenesis just gives you an absolutely insane amount of damage, staggering. Like Brewmaster monks are so jealous of how good this combo is. It's really strong. I don't love Petrified Blood making everything have a life cost when you're above half health, but this build has so much sustain that it is not a problem. Then we're also running Arctic Armor, which just gives us it gives us immunity to freeze, but we were already getting that out of Annihilation's approach, so not a big deal. And it gives you less fizz taken and less fire taken. And again, those stack with Doppelganger's guys. So we're getting like 31 out of this and 22 out of this, only while we're stationary, but it really does make it so that you can kind of, frankly, tank down a lot of stuff, especially with all the hit life you get back on hit. That is probably the biggest adjustment I've had to make in switching from Toxic Rain to this build to self-cast Forbidden Rite, is that there are so many times where I can just sit there and face tank stuff down, and I need to not be a coward about it. And that can be a bit of an adjustment to make, but it is really, really good, that combination of defensive layers. Obviously, you want an Enlightened support in there, but it only needs to be level 3. You're fine just running a level 3. And then Malevolence support, of course. You are a damage over time build. You want that Malevolence. Got to have it. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we have our triple curse link here. Despair, Enfeeble, Tempt Chains, and cast when damage taken all there. And that is because you take a ton of damage from casting Forbidden Rite. As you can see, I don't have Annihilation's approach active right now. I'm just casting it. And you can see, look at my health bar. I mean, it is getting blasted by Forbidden Rite. That's the whole point of Forbidden Rite. But also, as the final line of the Doppelganger guys indicates, you regenerate 10% of your life over a second when hit while sane. And we're always saying we are never using the insane component of this unique here. We really just want those two final lines, less fizz and chaos damage taken all the time, because those are, two of the only 3 types of damage that we take, and those are the 2 main types that we take. And then regenerating 10% of your life over 1 second, basically all the time, is pretty good. And now I just want to talk about the damage and like how we're scaling it. We're getting it mainly through a combination of spell skill gem levels. We have this crafted wand. This was a bit of a project. I used the graveyard to craft a lot of different profane wands. Profane wands have the huge advantage of having like massive amounts of cast speed, and then also the huge disadvantage of having a very high int requirement. So it does take a lot of int to make that work. I do think the Darkseer is like probably a more realistic, decent option for anybody just getting this build up and running. I crafted this with the graveyard. Like I said, I got the Fractured Chaos Dot multi, and then I wasn't happy with the rest of it, so I just scoured it, and then I just used fossils to craft until I got the 2 Chaos Spell Skill and All Spell Skill gem prefixes. And then unfortunately, I had to like do a little bit of a null gamble gameplay, and it took me like 5 attempts to finally get lucky on all of that. And then I just, as you can see, multi-modded and crafted cast speed and chaos damage. And then I did the prefix. It gives you chaos damage and increased skill effect duration on chaos skills. The only skill that applies to, I didn't think about it at the time. I was just like, surely that's better than like 1% more increased chaos damage, because the standard chaos damage increased prefix roll on a weapon is only like 45 to 51. The only chaos skill that you have that would apply to is Despair, and you have 100% uptime on that either way. So ultimately, you can go with increased chaos damage or this mod. It doesn't really matter either way. They're very comparable. And, you know, that is the weapon. That is probably the hardest craft. The other two were way simpler. The helm craft, I just basically bought a suppress spell damage fractured base. I didn't buy a lion pelt. I just went cheap with a center tricorn. I mean, you can go cheap with this build on your bases because you don't care about the energy shield or evasion or armor that are on them. Really, you just want to make sure it is an evasion base so that you can get like suppression mastery out of the tree and so on, and like get suppress mod on the item itself actually. And then I just slapped it with essences until I got int on the suffix, and then that was it. Just crafted it up from there. And then I did a little bit different here with these gloves. I actually bought these off of somebody, but they have fractured chaos res and then chance to poison on hit as a graveyard modifier. Now you can also just get chance to poison on hit as an eater of worlds implicit. You can just get use the like tier 3, what are they called? I think I have some in my tab here. Yeah, the Grand Eldritch Ichor will give you 15% chance to poison on hit, so you can just run that as an implicit, and then that actually would make this, you know, if I, instead of having that fractured chance to poison on hit, if I instead had that as a suffix, I could probably just have more suppress as a suffix, like suppress and chaos res and int, or maybe fire res. That would make curing a little bit easier on that front, but you know, it's fine. It is what it is. Again, I spammed with essences, with life essences until I was happy with the int on the suffix. And then I just crafted AoE gems and AoE effect on the prefix here, then Fizz taking his fire on the prefix on the helm. And that was about all there was to those. And then for the ring, like I said, I was initially using this Circle of Nostalgia. I ultimately bought an amethyst ring with fractured T1 cast speed on it, and I just spammed essences on it, dot multi essences, until I got a fire res roll and a life roll, and then I crafted increased damage, and then I haven't done anything else with this. I don't even have another mod on it. I suppose I could slam an exalt on it, but it wouldn't give me anything that I want, so I don't really feel like I need to. And that's basically it for the crafted gear. Very fast to run through the crafted gear. So we do use the Tides of Time Vanguard belt, the Uber Shaper belt. It's pretty cheap to get your hands on. One important note here that I want to make sure I absolutely am clear about. You want to have 3 charges of utility flasks every 3 seconds. And you also want to have at least 1 charge on your life flask every 3 seconds. It doesn't have to be 2. It is a little better if it's 2, but you know, it's not the end of the world. As for the mana flask charges, that doesn't matter at all. I think I've already talked at length about the defenses, so I don't really think there's anything else to say about all of those. I guess the one piece of unique gear that I haven't mentioned so far, 2 pieces really, are the replica Dragonfang's Flight. It's pretty self-explanatory. You want a Forbidden Rite one, that is the best option. As for the reservation efficiency of skills and reduced attribute requirements, I went with a minimum of 8% res efficiency so that I could fit everything in. I could fit in all of these skills that I have down here, and then also fit Invite here. Now you can get away with that with just having like 1 mana roll somewhere on your gear, like a ring prefix, you know, or like a little bit more int than I have maybe, or even just by taking this node right here, which will also give you 5% increased flask effect and will push your fire res from 89 to 90 because of the ruby flask. That is an option. And then you could potentially go lower on your reservation efficiency of skills from the Dragonfang's Flight, save yourself a little bit of divines there. The 10% reduced attribute requirements is really only necessary. I mean, it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be 10, but it's only helpful because of the Profane Wand. Now, because of that being on there, and this is something you're going to want to look at in the Calcs tab of Path of Building. So you click the Calcs tab, and then you'll come over here and you'll look at attributes, and specifically the Int required. That is going to be the main limiting factor in this build. Strength required can be 2, but that's, you get enough from Dragonfang's Flight and then just pathing around the tree that I think you're good. And then also having the Rakyata's Lethal Pride helps with that as well. So because of that Int requirement, because of kind of fine tuning that, and then also you have a massive amount of decks, you're able to use a lot of tattoos to fix things. So I use this tattoo to get a bit of reduced shock effect. You could do reduced curse effect. You can also do poison chance as an Int tattoo option. I think there aren't really that many great strength tattoos for this build, I don't think. And also, like, you are kind of starved on strength, so I just stuck with strength as it was. And then, finally, like, okay, if I switch to the Dark Seer, I could tattoo these 2 Int nodes here and go from 70% reduce effect of shock with the Soul of Garakan up to 90%. That would be pretty convenient, but whatever. But all these Dex nodes, I am just throwing in tons and tons and tons of suppress tattoos in here. And I have a lot of leftover Dex. Like, I'm at 191 still, and the amount that I need is only 143. According to the Calcs tab of PoB. So I could get away with another 4 of these, I suppose. And I think what I would probably use them on, you could play around, you could use them on a lot of different things, but I would probably use them on Tattoos of the Tafua Scout, the chance to avoid being poisoned. I think poison can be pretty annoying in this build. It really does interfere with a lot of the regen that you have. And so, yeah, giving yourself like 50-60% chance to avoid being poisoned really helps with a lot of some of the more annoying tier 17 maps where everything in the map is able to poison and the poisons last for like a million years. Okay, normally I would talk about mana, but mana is completely solved by the combination of Replica Sorrow of the Divine and Mahuxotl's Machination. You always have enough mana to cast your spells. Always, always, always. The only thing you have to do is just remember to cast Divine, your Divine Life Flask. You just remember to hit that on cooldown or whatever. Just always maintain that. And that is probably the one big downside of this build, of the setup. But for me, it's like second nature playing almost exclusively Pathfinder builds all the time. It's kind of weird to not have that requirement. And so I would say I'm pretty used to it by this point. All right, I got to the end of this and realized I hadn't actually talked about the Atlas passive tree or Ascendancy, so I just wanted to come back and make sure I add that in because I know there will be questions. So for the most part, a lot of the stuff going on in the Atlas passive tree is kind of, I wouldn't say locked in, but like there aren't really better options. There are a couple of things I would love to go path to, like I'd love to go get Mage Bane, but it's just so many points to get over here. And, just all those travel nodes just don't really seem all that worth it. As you can see, we're really not taking all that many masteries in here. We have the Chaos Mastery that gives you 10% more chaos damage to enemies that have Energy Shield. I do have that toggled on, and because we're at the dot cap, it's not actually doing anything. Maybe, but the thing is, it's kind of a good like overcompensation to have. Obviously, I've already mentioned Lethal Pride and Tempered by War. Those are kind of mandatory. And then a good Lethal Pride, which you can use to find the Mindless Jewel tool, or there's some online calculators for that as well that maybe work a little better. Try and find one of those. And then other than that, we're just taking a lot of Flask charge nodes. We're getting Careful Conservationist. We're getting Replenishing Remedies because it is giving us that really good Lethal Pride value. We're getting Field Medicine, so we're just getting so much more Life Flask value. And then anything that increases the duration of our flasks over the 100%, which, I mean, like, we're way over 100%. I don't even have a good prefix on this silver flask, and I'm still very easily at 100%. And we're actually running an increased effect prefix on the ruby flask and still at 100%. Like, The point here is all of the stuff that gives you increased flask duration and charge generation is just big quality of life. You know, you're making sure there are never any gaps, but also you're making sure you don't have to hit that life flask as often. And it really does add up to a lot of healing. The main things that I think that we're taking that are really like super important mastery wise are the 2 poison masteries. This one right here, making it so that enemies poisoned by you can't deal crits. This is insane. It basically makes you crit immune. It doesn't make you crit immune. It basically makes you crit immune. And what I mean by that is I've done a couple of tier 17s where I have I've had mods where like basically monsters will have like 12 extra projectiles and like 300% increased area of effect, and then also like 2600% increased crit multi. And as long as I can hit them first and get them poisoned, they're trivially easy. But sometimes they'll just off screen me because their AoE is like 400% or whatever, and it is, you know, there's not anything you can do about that. So I'd say normal content, normal stuff that's not insanely overtuned, back to basics, tier 17s, you basically are crit immune because of this, but for that specific kind of content, maybe not. And then the other poison mastery note is just your poisons deal their damage faster, 20% faster. This is a pretty huge damage increase. It's basic, but it's super good. The only other thing I think I would really consider adding in here would maybe be this Flask Mastery. Just it's always really good on a Pathfinder build to get 4% of your life whenever you use a flask. It just adds to so much healing. We are taking the Evasion Mastery that gives you suppression chance. It really does help with capping suppression. I know a lot of people like to run this 3% more spell suppression damage prevention. You can. It's, you know, it's pretty good. Reservation Mastery that gives you 8% increased damage for every aura and so on that you have on is just a really good free damage node. I have seen some people come up and take like Trickery to get a bit more int. I initially took Primal Spirit just to give myself a bit more int and strength when I was first starting out, and I do think the 1 point or even 2 points, frankly, into the Flask effect can be pretty good. Really good if you have a Progenesis, but you know, actually getting that strength and int out of Primal Spirit was pretty helpful early on. But then other than that, you know, it's the 2 cluster jewels, it's all of this stuff here, and then filling in all the suppression you need with all the tattoos, and then that's kind of all there is to it. Now, as for the Ascendancy, we have a very basic setup here. We're taking Master Toxicist because it is a massive poison damage increase, and it also gives us poison proliferation, so that really helps with clearing out packs of enemies. Nature's Reprisal is mandatory for getting withered. Of course, we want that. That's a huge damage increase. I mean, you can see 44% damage loss if we don't have Nature's Reprisal. Nature's Adrenaline is mandatory to get a Master Surgeon, and we want it anyway. It's huge for maintaining 100% uptime on flasks. And then Master Surgeon is crucial. I mean, you can see 2600 life and energy shield recovery per second, so obviously we gotta have that. And you know, it's pretty much as you'd expect here for the Ascendancy and the passive tree as well. Like, I've definitely seen some people play around with other stuff coming up the top side could help with int, but you know, I really don't want to lose out on like the life over here, some of the flask value stuff, the suppression. There's a lot of value down here in this bottom half of the tree, and then if you're not going that way, then it's kind of hard to get up here and get this stuff. On the other hand, it would be kind of nice to come up here and get the chance to poison with spells, or even just some of the cast speed and damage, you know, from actually taking Serpentine Spellslinger. So I could see doing a version of this that goes into the top half of the tree and then is able to adjust accordingly. I think that could be nice, but this is the way I've gone. All right, now let's move into the PoB again and talk about cluster jewels. So we have some options in terms of cluster jewels. I've seen some people run 12 mod cluster jewels. I didn't feel like doing that. I think they generally will do that to fix their resistances or their stats. I just went with a more normal setup of 8 mod cluster jewels, increased chaos damage cluster jewels. I went with one that is a very standard setup of Wicked Paul, Unwaveringly Evil, and Unholy Grace, the classic. And then for the other one, I did Unwaveringly Evil, Wicked Paul, and Unspeakable Gifts. Getting that extra explode on death chance is just really nice for making your clear speed even faster. plays pretty nicely with the poison proliferation that you get for being a Pathfinder as well. So just really good to have even more speedy clear. And then because this is a Pathfinder build, we are going to be running one Flask effect duration cluster jewel with spiked concoction and brewed for potency. That's pretty much a given. This gives you Alchemist Genius, gives you way more Flask uptime, makes you all your flasks stronger, gives you more res, gives you more effect on your progenesis. Just very, 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 very good to have. And then also to give ourselves the chance to poison with spells that we really need here, we're going to run one Chaos Dot multi medium cluster that has the node Septic Spells on it. That'll give us 20% chance to poison on hit with spell damage. That in conjunction with 5% somewhere. It can be 5% on a rare jewel like I have here. It can be 5% on a tattoo like I mentioned earlier. It could even just be 20% on your gloves if you use the really expensive these bad boys right here, the exceptional Eldritch Ichors. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. You could maybe run, like, you could use Grand Eldritch Ichors and then Orb of Conflict it up, but you could get 20% as the implicit on your gloves, and that would also do the trick. But the point here is you just want to make sure that you have enough that when you look at your PoB, you have a 100% chance to poison, and 20% of that is definitely going to come from Septic Spells. It really, really makes it super easy to fix your poison chance just by having that. Other than that, Wicked Pull is super, super valuable. So you want to run Wicked Pull in every single one of your medium chaos clusters. And then for all the ones where you're not running Septic Spells, you want to run Circling Oblivion. Gives you a massive increase on the amount of duration on your poisons. It helps with anytime you have to move, anytime you have to dodge and deal with mechanics. I mean, as you can see, 9.5% total damage per poison increase. Like if we switch from all primary projectiles hitting to just one, we're nowhere near the dot cap. Of course, you're not going to hit with just one projectile on any large enemy. You're going to hit with probably 5 or 6 and again be pushing into that dot cap, but it is good to kind of over prepare. As you can see, Circling Oblivion giving 9.5% increased damage is absolutely crazy. So super, super valuable medium cluster notable here that you definitely want to have everywhere you can, but of course super important to get the spiked concoction setup and the one setup with Septic Spells. I suppose you could do Septic Spells and Circling Oblivion, but you know, I didn't because I don't know, at the dot cap already. Wicked Pulse kind of nice, having that increased skill effect duration that isn't just chaos skills only. Having that apply to Immortal Call and Enduring Cry is pretty convenient. Also, I think I just made this one by hand, the Septic Spells and Wicked Pull, and I didn't want to spend on one with Septic Spells and Circling Oblivion. All right, so we're also running a small cluster jewel. I've seen some people run two, one to give themselves Enduring Composure, so they always have 100% uptime on endurance charges. That is definitely a thing you can do. I didn't want to give up a jewel to do that though, but it is definitely something you could do. You could, like in my case right here, I could drop this jewel and I could switch this small passive over to poison chance, and then I would still be at 100%, and I could do that. That is an option for level 100. Maybe that's what I'll do. But in any case, I think it's very, very, very important to run a Born of Chaos small cluster jewel. 2 passive skills, you get a lot of chaos res out of this. It really helps. You can get fire res on it too. That'll help with your resistances in general. And then the whole point here is just 3% more max chaos res, push you up into the high 80s on chaos res. You know, we are sitting, like I said, 88% chaos res, absolutely crazy amount of chaos damage reduction. And there is no chaos pen in this game that I'm aware of. There's Wither, which really, really sucks. It's a bad mod to deal with. Enemies do chaos damage and Wither on hit because you do so much self-inflicted chaos damage. Wither is not great to deal with. You know, you're also converting so much damage into chaos. It's not great to be withered, but having that much chaos res just really makes you so insanely tanky. All right, now I'll cover all the other unique jewels. I've already mentioned Lethal Pride at length. I've mentioned the Watcher's Eye as well. So that really only leaves one other one, and that would be this, the Parandus Pact. And I went with one that is +5 to maximum life, and then I stuck it in here. You could swap these around. You could have this one over here and run a Lethal Pride over here that's nice. And you would just want to make sure that you get a Lethal Pride that has like good mods in this area. You wouldn't get quite as much value out of it because you're only taking, what, 3 notables in this area, and At least when I was looking, they were a lot more expensive to get good lethal prides over here, but you could swap these around, have a Parandus Pact over here since you are taking more nodes over here, like a lot more, and definitely get yourself more life. Kind of up to you exactly how you want to play that out, but definitely an option that you can play with. And then I personally found one that I thought was fairly cheap from somebody, I don't know, a few divines or something that cannot be cursed with silence, and I just thought, that's very convenient. I think I'll buy that. Okay, I've already mentioned the massive stat requirement that comes with the Profane Wand, and that really is like the only thing that requires you to have a huge amount of int. Like if we swap over here in the Calcs tab, looking again, 215 current, 213 required. If we swap to the Dark Seer, just to show that off again, the requirement goes down to 143. So that is probably the last little bit of like super important gearing minutia that I would say that like really matters here. You know what? I missed one thing that I do want to harp on. This is something I haven't been seeing anybody else doing, and that is running Forbidden Flames and Forbidden Flesh. This is like real, like in-game min-maxy. Basically, I had on my Toxic Rain Pathfinder, and I thought, well, you know, why not? Why shouldn't I use this on this other build as well? But a lot of people will just run more rare jewels, use them to fix their resistances, use them to give themselves more life, maybe use them to get more poison on hit and poison duration, just make sure that they're absolutely at the dot cap. I went this direction. I went with my Gathering Winds jewels, which I think right now a set of Gathering Winds jewels costs about 50 divines. And the reason I went with that is just simply, as you can see here, Gathering Winds, you get 8% increased action speed from having Tailwind by default from Gathering Winds, and that can stack all the way up to 22% increased action speed. And as you can see, my cast speed is very fast when fully buffed, really able to move around super fast. Now, this also means that the self-inflicted damage from Forbidden Rite is faster. It also means that the healing on hit from Forbidden Rite is higher. So I do think that this works out in my favor to run this kind of setup, but it's not the only one you can run. You can just run rare jewels that are cheap and have like good stats on them. Definitely an option, but I've also pulled up some other options as well that you can run. And actually, let's just look in the PoB here. So I will drop one of these Flesh Flames just to kind of show off. As you can see, we're so over the dot cap that even dropping the Flesh Flame, we're still at the dot cap. That, again, a good thing. Good to be very over prepared for it. So I have quite a few options, like I mentioned, that I think you could look at as Flesh Flame options if you don't want to run rare jewels, if you're really looking to push the min-max in-game stuff here. You could run Endless Munitions. This works really well. 2 extra projectiles will push you from 6 to 8. That'll give you a lot more life on hit. You know, if you're not already at the dot cap, then that'll definitely push you into that range. It's really good. Obviously, if you're looking at it with 1 projectile, it's going to show as no change, but it is actually a pretty significant change, and it'll add more like screen clutter, which is always fun. It's definitely my favorite thing about Pathfinder. Now, Forbidden Rite can't chain, it can't fork, it can't do any of that fancy stuff, so don't mess around with Ricochet or like any of these other ones for Pathfinder. The only Deadeye. The only ones that really do anything are Endless Munitions and Gathering Winds. You could also run Nature's Boon. I don't think Nature's Boon is actually all that great in this build because your only magic utility flasks are Ruby and Silver, and I just don't really think it's actually that great in this build, really, truly. Now, I mean, if you're running an Amethyst Flask, like just a regular magic Amethyst Flask instead of a Progenesis, which you can do, that will save you a bit of currency, and you can give yourself like curse effect reduction with that. That's pretty good. Then maybe Nature's Boon could be justifiable, but I don't know exactly how expensive that is. That is one that I didn't actually look at. I think Way of the Poacher can be really good, giving yourself frenzy charges on kill and on hit when you hit rare and unique enemies, and then also +1 to max frenzy charges means basically you're going to be at 4 frenzy charges all the time. If we really change some of this gear around here, like I made some magic boots that I would then possibly run with a what is it called, Ancestral Vision. Yeah, an Ancestral Vision setup. And this is something you could do. You could run Ancestral Vision and then some really nice crafted magic boots that have a lot of ailment immunity on them and give yourself complete ailment immunity. You would lose out on the Annihilation's Approach boots, and that's both good and bad. You'd lose out on the permanent adrenaline, but you'd also lose out on the like 400 life per second or so of fire damage that you're taking all the time. So I think you could justify it either way. And one final little tip here on the Annihilation's approach is there is like a 10-second or so 5-second cooldown when you use them to turn them off again, but you can just right-click the buff to turn it off. And that does work. And yeah, that's not really related to anything else, just is a thing that you can do. So anyways, in this setup here where I've set up, definitely lowered my DPS quite a bit below the dot cap, I think that switching over to Way of the Poacher here is not quite as convenient as doing a Gale Force setup, doing the Gathering Wind setup, but I think it is an option you can run with. And as I have pulled up here, Way of the Poacher, a set of Way of the Poacher jewels is very cheap. It's like 7 divines for both of them. So that would work pretty well. That would definitely help you get up to the dot cap. You could also run Avatar of the Chase. That's a really cheap one as well. And that'll also increase your attack and cast and move speed by a lot. 25% increased move speed from Avatar of the Chase is really, really appealing. I could maybe see doing that instead of the super expensive Gathering Wind setup that I've been going with. But, I already have them, right? So... yeah, and Gathering Winds does still give you more cast speed than Avatar of the Chase and more move speed when it's fully stacked. So, like, why downgrade myself just because it's a little cheaper? I don't know. So those are kind of the main Forbidden Flesh and Flame options that I think you can play around with. Again, you can also just run Rare Jewels. I think this build works so well, and it is so far over the dot cap and over the level of defenses that you need to do tier 17s and Uber bosses comfortably, that you really have a lot of freedom to kind of go in any direction that your budget and your desire to push the build as far as you can will allow you to do. Okay, now let's move on to build disabling mods. Monsters Avoid Poison, Bleed, and Impale is definitely the worst mod. It basically makes it so that you can't do any damage. You go from doing like 37 million DPS to doing 700,000 DPS. It's just completely brutal. I've bricked several maps because of this. That's why I'm really, really emphasizing make sure that you never run a map that has Monsters Avoid Poisons. Minus max res is also really bad. You are so built around converting damage into fire res or fire damage or chaos damage, and so then having that reduced by 10, 12, 15%, so you're going from 89, 90% fire res, 88% chaos res down to 70 or less on those is just, it's such a massive increase in the amount of damage that you take that you really don't want to play around with that at all. Less recovery of life and energy shield. You are so reliant on your life flask to keep your health up, and more importantly to keep your energy shield up so that you can cast spells. If you have less recovery rate of energy shield and life on a map, you won't be able to cast anything. You won't be able to do any damage. You're just completely bricked. Reduce flask charges generated. Another horrible mod. You are very, very reliant on having flask charges up to maintain that life flask and to maintain that Sorrow of the Divine, and also to maintain your ruby flask and your amethyst flask. So again, just really, 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 really unmanageable. There are a couple of tier 17 mods. I mean, there are a lot of tier 17 mods that are bad. Obviously, a lot of ones that are, you can't recover any energy shield. You can't regen stuff. Less defenses is pretty brutal. I think meteors on using flasks, that was one that I stress tested to see can I make this work? And the answer was yeah, a little bit, but it was such a pain to use that it really wasn't worth it. It would have been better if I had just immediately upon opening that map and seeing 50 meteors coming for my face, that I should have just I should have just immediately left and done a map that wouldn't have taken 15, 20 minutes to slow clear through. As for your Pantheon, I like to swap it around quite a bit, but Soul of Lunaris is pretty great to have. The reduced elemental damage taken if you've been hit recently is always active, so you always have that reduced elemental damage taken, so it's pretty much always the best option. I would say that in single target situations, maybe you could justify Soul of Solaris, but honestly, I don't know, you're always turning off that Captured Forest to the Flames buff. I really think that Soul of Aracali is only useful for doing Uber Cirrus. I did play around with this. I did find it to be a little helpful for quickly darting through Uber Cirrus's damage over time effects on the ground, but generally speaking, I lock in Soul of Lunaris and just stick with that forever. As for Soul of Garakan, in the setup I'm using now where you can be shocked, this is definitely the best one to have. I would use this almost all the time. If I'm doing a map where there's like 100% chance for monsters to poison, then maybe I would run Soul of Shikari instead. I guess if I had Burning Ground, I could do the Soul of Aberath instead, but Soul of Rosatha hasn't proven that I haven't felt like I needed Soul of Rosatha at any point in running this build, which is kind of a testament just to how strong this build is, because usually that's a must-have for any Pathfinder build, but it hasn't been necessary at all. I think, you know, one of the possible advantages of a build that doesn't run the Annihilations approach setup and we're switched over to running like Elemental Ailment Immunity boots and a Ancestral Vision unique jewel would be that you could run Soul of Shikari, and then that's 5% reduced chaos damage taken, and it just like completely nullifies the effect of poisons on you. It makes them so much less dangerous than they possibly can be in situations where monsters are able to poison you like 40, 50, 60 times in some tier 17 maps. As for bandits, you kill them all, pretty much the normal behavior for dealing with bandits. All right, I think that pretty much covers this build. I know it was a lot, but it is a really fun, powerful build, and I think it's probably going to be the build I focus on playing for the next little while, at least. I'm still really enjoying the in-game revamp in this patch. I don't really love all the corpses. I have thousands of corpses, and yet I still feel like I never have enough to make the crafts that I'm trying to do. But I do like all the other aspects of this league a lot, so I'm going to keep playing it all the way to the end, and at least for now, this is the main build I will be using as I focus on doing all of that. All right, feel free to ask questions if you have any, and thank you for watching. Bye.